Okay, we're good. Okay. All right. Good evening. My name is Jay, and I'm here member of San Diego First Church of the Brethren, and this is our Friday night peace venue. And I want to explain a little bit what that is because I noticed a couple were asking about that. We meet every Friday night from 7 to 9, and it's just really a time of fellowship, a time of discussion, and mostly we have issues that have to do with peace. But sometimes we gather, we have a game night. Uh, Sometimes we even had karaoke and all kinds of different activities just to get together and have a good time and have fellowship with one another. So that's what we do. Now, if you happen to have a subject that you would like to present here on a Friday night, if you can let myself or Edward know, and we'll let you know what the procedure is to arrange for that. And you can come one night, just like tonight, present your thing of interest. Okay, we want you to feel at home here tonight. There's popcorn. We got some goodies left over from Sunday in there. There's some cake and some cheesecake in there, and we have coffee over here. And so please help yourself. And I did say popcorn, right? There's popcorn, and so we're good to go. So make yourself at home. Now I'm going to let Michael introduce our speaker tonight.
Thank, thank you, Jay. My name is Michael Brackney, and if you're wondering why Jay is introducing me, it's because the Church of the Brethren has asked the Peace Resource Center, which is one of the four partners on campus. We're located down in the Friends Center proper, just down below in the parking lot. We're in the right-hand wing as you enter. And as long as I'm talking about the Friends Center, I mentioned that the Friends meeting, Quakers, are the third partner. And the fourth partner is the American Friends Service Committee. And they have their offices in the left-hand wing. So the Peace Resource Center for a long time, or a couple of years, has been initiating a series of community conversations in the community on certainly peace-related issues. And it just so happens that the Church of the Brethren asked us to take responsibility for one Friday night meeting per month. And that's the third Friday night, which this is. And so this evening, we've had a number of such meetings. There have been several. The one last month was featured Professor Jonathan Grobart from SDSU talking about his new book, very, very appropriate, pertinent to the times, called Jewish Self-Determination Beyond Zionism, which is to say, beyond a fixation on constituting or basing Zionism on the existence of a state, or even more importantly, basing Jewish practice on the existence of a state, and that was put on in combination with a bunch of young folks in an organization called Jewish Voice for Peace. Just to say one more thing, the one previous to that, Derek Cassidy, Nancy Cassidy, and I put one on about nuclear weapons, which was a similarly small group, but very, very active. We had to tell everybody it was time to go home. There was so much discussion that came from it. So similarly tonight, we have a member of our Peace Resource Center board, Ann Hoiberg, here, who is a true veteran in our midst. And by veteran, I mean a veteran of activism in women's organizations. One organization in particular, but known as WILPF, but gee, what could that acronym stand for? Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. Anybody know when WILPF was organized? Well, I'm not going to tell you because Ann is. So I'll just say that Ann has been not only involved in such organizations for many years, but she's been on at least 8 trips abroad to help monitor elections in foreign countries. And that's just for starters. She's been to many conferences over the world, delivered many presentations, written many articles, many papers, and even a couple of books. So with that, Ann, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael. By the way, we're on Zoom also, so there will be some people who are Zooming in to watch this event. Yes. Anyway, I do want to welcome all of you to this event tonight. I am going to be talking a little bit about the World Refugee Day, which was yesterday. And I do have a quote from the Secretary General of the United Nations who read this particular spiel yesterday. 1 in 69 people around the world, approximately half of them children, are currently displaced at a continuingly increasing number of people leaving their homes, not necessarily their countries. Some are leaving their countries, but there is a lot of people departing from their homes and also from their countries. And so it is creating a flux throughout our world. And we currently have about 117 million people who have left their home. They haven't necessarily left their country. Some are just internally displaced. So it is a process that we're going to have to deal with it, and it keeps increasing the number of migrants who have to leave their homes. So the Secretary General said, let us pledge to reaffirm the world's collective responsibility in assisting and welcoming refugees, in upholding their human rights, including the right to seek asylum, in safeguarding the integrity of the refugee, can't read this word, the refugee protection regime, and ultimately in resolving conflicts so that those forced from their communities can return home. Now, this is from the Secretary General of the United Nations. So tonight I am going to talk very, very briefly about refugees. In fact, I think I'll just wrap that up quite quickly. Today was a very special day because a refugee exhibit opened in the Civic Center downtown. And several of the refugees will also be honored throughout our public library system. So if you go to the City Heights Library, you will probably see a photograph of a woman from my book, Tears of War, Stories of Refugee Women. And there are 37 women in this book from 15 different countries, and their photographs will be on display in many of our public libraries. Wonderful is that? This is in recognition of World Refugee Day, which is June 20th. I also will talk about the importance of WILPF and how I would like to reestablish the WILF branch here in San Diego. And I would like to encourage all of you to join WILF and see what we can accomplish as far as ending wars. So that's what we'll be talking about tonight. I'll also mention just briefly that there was a Congress here in the United States that was open to all WILF members and friends. It was all on Zoom. It was a 4-day conference. And Judith Hand was even one of the speakers at that particular Congress. So we want to encourage more of these Congresses to get the message out, the message of the importance of ending all wars. As WILF said back in, I can't remember what year it was, but they said, let's feed the cities, not the Pentagon. So let's see if we can accomplish. Edward, what am I doing wrong? Okay, so we're going to talk just briefly about some of the social movements that have been so important to our world and our community. And I always like to start out with the abolition and the Emancipation Proclamation that Abraham Lincoln so brilliantly instituted back in 1863. I had to include the temperance prohibition program because it really took up 2 amendments to our Constitution. The first one to prohibit alcoholic beverages, and the second to repeal it. And so the major movement for most women throughout this country was the suffrage movement. It only took 72 years for women to get the right to vote and have it in our Constitution. From 1848 until 1920. Now, at the end of that period, there were actually 2 million people who were members of the suffrage movement. So it was an incredibly dedicated group of people who belonged to that suffrage movement. Following up with that, and back in 1960, JFK said, I'm kind of curious. Is there discrimination against women going on in this country? And so he decided to create the President's Commission on the Status of Women. And he asked Eleanor Roosevelt to head up this commission. And what's fascinating to me is because of that commission, just about every city in our country created a commission on the status of women. Here in San Diego, we actually had the San Diego City Commission on the Status of Women and the San Diego County Commission on the Status of Women and Girls. We still have the County Commission on the Status of Women and Girls. Very, very effective program that Eleanor Roosevelt and JFK created to really look at what is discrimination doing to the welfare of our country, to the welfare of women. So that was a major, major endeavor that ended up creating the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that President Johnson put into effect. But it was really based on the work of that commission that JFK and Eleanor Roosevelt really created and made it work. So discrimination became a very important part with Title VII. Women all over our country, if they feel they've discriminated against, they have this act to back them up. And also, the part of Title IX of the educational amendments, and they were recently named after Patsy Mink because she was so involved in getting these educational amendments going. You can't really spend a lot more money on boys' education than you can on girls. There has to be some equality there. And we've seen a phenomenal change in how women have really taken advantage of this and their daughters. Oh my gosh, Title IX has been an amazing boost for women and girls in our country. We now have just about 60% of all college students are women. Now I'm getting concerned about boys. Come on. Everybody needs to be educated. And we have the Equal Rights Amendment, which was written and presented by Alice Paul back in 1923. She had been a staunch suffragist, and she thought, well, we better get an amendment going for women to have equal rights with men. So she created the Equal Rights Amendment. It was presented in Congress. Guess what? It wasn't really passed until 1972. Hello, how many years is that? Almost 50 or somebody do the math. But anyway, no, 1923. I was close. Anyway, then it was sent to our states, and our states were all asked to really ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. And several states really were pretty enthusiastic about it. Several were not at all enthusiastic. And by 1982, only 35 states had ratified the Equal Rights Amendment. So it was dropped. Well, in the meantime, 3 other states went ahead and ratified it. And in 2020, Virginia ratified it. So we met the required 38 states to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. However, many of our members of Congress say, sorry, ladies, but you missed the deadline. You were supposed to have those 38 states ratifying by 1982, and you missed it. Sorry. So I think we're going to need more enthusiastic feminists in our Congress who will say, come on, we have 38 states. What more do you want? It's been ratified. So we'll see what happens. Edward? Okay, so I wanted to talk about the peace movement in particular. And this wonderful Peace Palace was created thanks to Andrew Carnegie. He donated $1.4 million. He donated $1.4 million to The Hague. And The Hague created this beautiful, beautiful Peace Palace. And that was created in 1913. Now, this is the location of the International Court of Justice. And those judges there have become quite active related to the situation going on in Palestine. And so they just came out in May with some demands to request that Israel immediately stop its military actions in the city of Rafah. So the International Court of Justice has been taking on many international cases. And so it's really exciting for me to see that this particular organization is really catching on. Now, back in 1915, it also became the site of the creation of WILPF. Now, two determined women decided that they were still interested in getting the right to vote, but they thought there was more that women could be doing. And so they thought it would be a wonderful opportunity for women to get organized. They invited 4,000 women to meet at the Willard Hotel in DC, and they were going to talk about going to The Hague and talking, trying to create resolutions, and then talking with the leaders of all the countries that were involved in World War I. World War I had started 9 months before they finally met at The Hague. But anyway, that was the goal. So they met at the Willard Hotel in January of 1915. And then 47 of those women from the U.S. got on a boat and went to The Hague in April of 1915. Now, World War I was going on, and there was this concern, maybe the Germans will torpedo that boat before we get to the Netherlands. So there was that concern, but they made it. And so they met, there were about 1,500 women who met at The Hague to discuss how do we end this war. And these two women were in the forefront of that. I'll talk a little bit more about them in a minute. Okay, so the beginnings of the peace movement, as I said, started at the Willard Hotel, run by Jane Addams and Harry Chapman Catt. And they created a program for constructive peace. And they also formed the Women's Peace Party. Now, this didn't start all at that particular meeting. It took a couple of years. Now, they did go to The Hague. And as I said, there were 1,500 people there. And they created 20 resolutions. How to stop this war. How to stop it. End it. And so they created 20 resolutions. And the first three are pretty demanding. We women at this International Congress protest against the madness and horror of war. We urge the governments of the world to put an end to this bloodshed and to begin peace negotiations. We urge the governments of all nations to refer future disputes to arbitration, conciliation. Now, these are just 3 of the 20 resolutions. Now, they decided that they would go and visit all of the kings of the countries in Europe and the chancellors and the presidents and prime ministers and present those 20 resolutions, emphasis on these 3. And so off they went. And Jane Addams met with Woodrow Wilson several times, really urging him not to get into World War I, but he did back in 1917. But what's interesting was those 20 resolutions were quite powerful. Woodrow Wilson, actually incorporated some of those resolutions into his 14 points for peace. And part of the UN Charter includes a lot of the wordage from those resolutions, not to mention the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Okay, as I mentioned, Jane Addams was in the forefront of this, along with Carrie Chapman Catt. And as you can see, Jane Addams did create the Hull House. It still exists in Chicago, but the University of Illinois has taken over the property around the Hull House and has created a campus right in Chicago. So that's been quite a boom for that part of Chicago. She was an author, a wonderful speaker, just an amazing, amazing woman. Active in the ACLU, the NAACP, and the National American Women's Suffrage Association. And she was president of WILPF, and she received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1931 for her peace endeavor. Okay, Carrie Chapman Catt, also a suffragist. What's interesting to me, she was the only girl in her high school class in Iowa, and she was a valedictorian, of course. And after she graduated, she wanted to go to college. Her father said, I don't have any money for that. So she started working part-time, put herself through college. And after she graduated from college, she was offered a teaching job immediately, became a principal within a matter of years. And by the age of 24, she was the president of the Board of Education in that city, Mason City. So she headed up the Board of Education in that city. She was also very active as a suffragist. She did meet with Woodrow Wilson, presenting her winning plan to keep the U.S. out of World War I. And so she was very active in that area. And then in 1920, she founded the League of Women Voters, which has continued forever in this country. And I don't know how many different chapters we have here in San Diego. For sure, we have 2. Okay. I like the title of her one book, Why Wars Must Cease. Okay, the 100th anniversary of WILPF occurred in 2015. And a good friend of mine, Dr. D. Aker, and I just so happened that we wanted to go to that 100th anniversary. So if you look under that sign, we are the movement. You can see my blonde hair, and then next to me, one person over is D. Aker. Anyway, it was a wonderful celebration. And it didn't quite duplicate the 50th anniversary at The Hague, but it was certainly a wonderful, wonderful experience. Okay, so what does WILPF do? Well, they try to connect peace, environmental, racial, and social justice issues. They oppose war and militarism. Boy, do they oppose it, really. They've been in the forefront, really opposing all wars. And they support a just economy and a healthy planet, and they advance human rights. And speaking of human rights, it brought to my mind Eleanor Roosevelt, because after FDR died, President Truman asked her if she would go to the newly formed United Nations and represent our country. So she said, I'd be delighted. and off she went to the UN. And they had various commissions at the UN, even back in 1946. And she became the president of the commission. I'm sorry, she became the chairperson of the Commission on Human Rights. And their mission was to create the Declaration of Human Rights, which lists all of our rights. And all countries that belong to the United Nations adhere to the UDHR. And I did bring some copies of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights if you want to know what your rights are. And what I think is fascinating is I think Eleanor Roosevelt was very aware of how to not genderize the words. So there's nothing like all men are created equal. There's nothing like that. It's either everyone or all humans or men and women, but there's none of this. And even when she talks in that UDHR about divorce, she says the spouses must agree to a divorce. She didn't say the husband and the wife. And I thought, wow, she's so ahead of her time. Anyway, back during World War II, she contacted Admiral Halsey, and she said, we have so many injured personnel in different hospitals on the Pacific Rim after, the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So she wanted to visit as many of our troops as possible. So she went to 11 different islands and met with over 400,000 of our injured personnel. And I'm thinking, 400,000 injured personnel. This is tragic. And so that's another reason we need to stop war. Okay, so this is what WILPF has been up to since its founding back in 1915. And so I like the title, The International Committee of Women for Permanent Peace. And maybe we could use that tagline when we create our branch again here in San Diego. Permanent peace. Wow, that really charges me up. WILPF was very active during the Depression in 1932. It was decided that they would collect signatures. WILPF would collect signatures and present it at this council meeting on disarmament. So WILPF collected, can you believe this, 6 million signatures and presented it that they wanted all countries to get rid of their weaponry. Everybody was to disarm according to that particular endeavor. 6 million signatures. Wow. They also had hearings on the arms industry. And of course, as it says down on the bottom here, they created the saying, feed the cities, not the Pentagon. So I was thinking, it might be fun to find out what is our local war industry about here in San Diego. I know we have Northrop Grumman and Raytheon, but how much do they create, and what do they create? So maybe we could do that a Friday night here. Ask some of those members of the war industry to come and enlighten us. And then it might be fun to ask them to step down and give up their well-paying jobs and try to end the war industry. They protested again World War II, and they were very much against the Japanese internment program that we had going on in the United States. They were against all nuclear testing. They really came out against the testing, I believe, in Bimini Island or wherever that was. And so they were very actively involved in opposing weaponry of all types. And they even opposed the creation of NATO. And even recently, when there's been talk about these different countries that want to join NATO, WILPF has also been opposing those countries from joining. They've been very active in opposing the testing of nuclear weapons. And as I said, feed the cities, not the Pentagon. And then they created the Stop the Arms Race, or STAR. Just look at the initials. Back in 1982, they've been so actively involved in the nuclear, banning all nuclear weapons. At the conference that was held just 2 weeks ago, they talked about not only ending all nuclear weapons, but ending all nuclear power. And at that conference, they talked about the deadliness of the waste from creating nuclear power and also nuclear weapons. So they've been very much on the forefront of trying to end all nuclear weaponry and all nuclear power. Those plants are dangerous. They created what was called a peace train. I went to the Fourth World Conference on Women in 1995, and unbeknownst to me, they had a peace train that left from Helsinki and on the train all the way to Beijing, where the conference was held. But wouldn't that have been a wonderful train ride? Wow. And there were about 250 people on that train going to the Fourth World Conference on Women. Okay. The UN Security Council passed Resolution 1325 in the year 2000. That was an important issue because it was related to women, peace, and security. And that resolution has been expanded to include 8 more resolutions, all demanding that women are part of all peace negotiations and to really promote peace. The PFA is a platform for action that came out of the Fourth World Conference for Women. It's an incredible book, and it lists all the different activities that are essential if women are to achieve true equality. So it's a wonderful blueprint of what we all need to do, and many countries have actually accepted that particular platform for action. I think President Clinton took it very seriously also, and he created an interagency council on women, and he had each of those agencies to look at that book, the Platform for Action, and ask them, what's in this book related to your agency? And do what you need to do to adhere to what's in that book. And I thought, wow, that's really getting down to brass tacks. And it was fascinating because women would show up for meetings of the Interagency Council on Women, and they'd all be bragging, well, we put into effect, and we did so and so, and we're making a lot of progress as far as women's rights go. Yes, that's wonderful. So, WILPF was very involved also in looking at the platform for action and seeing how can we incorporate all of this into our different committees' work. And they also took on race. They've done a lot of work in talking about reparations and trying to get those going. Cuba has been an important part of WILPF's agenda, trying to get rid of that economic blockade so that China can start to become part of the United States world. So they've been pushing that also for many. And they support the United Nations. They were very much against the invasion of Iraq and spoke out against that for the 3 different operations that went into the major war of Iraq. Really a sad, sad situation what went on in Iraq, and it's not over yet. So, of course, they're working on the environment.
The system entertainment room.
The Congress that was just held was titled Water as in the Forefront for Peace. So they did several presentations about the importance of water and how it's related to creating peace. And so I thought that was pretty monumental also. And they're continuing to hold these congresses. And the next time there's a Congress, I don't care where it is, I'm going to be there.
You can increase the volume now.
But mute us because we are also unmuted.
Okay, I wanted to get to what's really that's what happens in wars. Well, we all know wars are terribly destructive, but what does it do as far as the well-being? And I just listed, there are about 32 or 33 current wars going on, but I just listed some of those. And when I looked at the DRC, I just became really angry. Since the DRC, or the Belgium Congo back in that day, declared independence, it just was as though it opened up the world to different militias to bring in their weapons into Congo area, try to take the resources and create mayhem. Currently, there are about 70 militias. And many of the people in the DRC have left. I mean, it's terrifying. People carrying weapons and shooting and what have you. One of the women in my book from the DRC, her husband was killed by rebels, and her 3 children disappeared. And then she was kidnapped by the rebels and taken to their. And she and 5 women in that camp said, we're not putting up with this. And they walked 60 miles to Kenya, pleaded help, even though they were speaking French and everybody in Kenya was speaking English. But she ended up coming to the United States, and she's now a registered nurse. I mean, talk about an amazing woman. She was actually a teacher in the DRC, but here she's decided to dedicate her life to being. Okay, so if we look at some of these countries, Somalia, since its civil war, it's been at war. How can that poor country ever be rehabilitated? And remember back maybe 20 years, we started taking more and more Somali refugees. And recently, well, I shouldn't say recently, but in 2016, we took 600 600 refugees from the DRC. And most of those refugees had been in a refugee camp for at least 20 years.
Wow.
One couple had 11 children. They had lived in a refugee camp for 21 years. There were no opportunities for education, opportunities to learn any skills. And all those women, and I met so many of them, all they wanted to do was, I want my children to go to school.
I can do either that.
The concept.
The moment I do this,
they wanted jobs, but they had no skills. And the flower fields of Carlsbad hired a lot of those women. They loved it. It was a wonderful experience. So what more can we say? If we look at these wars, mostly they're terrorist or insurgency, so they're militias that are really ruining a country. And many are civil wars. Mexico, all the literature always puts in parentheses, their war is a drug war. So it's different than a civil war. Terrorism. So what are the deaths? What are the numbers of people who died during war? World War I, 20 million people died. World War II, 50 to 70 million people died. That includes soldiers, civilians, what have you. Ukraine, we're around 80,000. So it's pushing up. Palestine, it's at 37,000 today, but it's also going to be pushing up to 40,000. And so if we looked at all 33 of those wars that are going on, we're talking about the loss of millions of people. So I think we all need to adhere to the position of WILPF, and that is we want peace. And we want it now. And let's all get together, become more involved in trying to create a really peaceful country. And think of what we could save as far as our environment goes, as far as our climate goes. We're experiencing more and more hot days. Even today, I was a little bit warm and I was welcoming that, but, we're going to have hot days this summer. So we really do have to join WILPF and become a part of ending the war industry and taking that money to use for really beneficial things like saving our oceans, saving our communities, providing good educations without horrendously expensive student loans, and using that money to really benefit all of us and our communities. So I think I've covered everything. I did want to mention also, and I I wanted to mention just what the U.S. spends on nuclear weaponry and the nuclear business world. And it's about, last year they spent over $51 billion just on nuclear weapons. Now, across the whole world, the total was about 92 billion. And China came in second. As I said, the US spent about 51 billion on just nuclear weapons. And China came in at 11.9 billion. And Russia was, I think, 7.8 billion. For a grand total across all countries, 92 billion. So it's a big industry, and we need to figure out how we can ensure, like WILPF did many years ago, that we will not spend any more money on nuclear weaponry. Okay, any questions? Yes.
A little bit more about your wish to regenerate WILPF here locally?
I'd love to. Thank you, Michael.
Yes.
We did have a small branch here, and we didn't really get involved. I think I must have skipped over one of the slides that shows what committees you can. Become active in. Yeah. Oh, well, the one I think that we here in San Diego should become involved in is the Disarm Committee. What happened to it? Anyway, there is a committee on Cuba and the Bolivarian theory. There's a committee on the Earth economy, how to deal with how to get a good economy going. The Middle East is another category, another committee. But I think Disarm is the one where we really belong. And I would like to push that.
I'm going to pass this microphone around to anyone who wants to ask a question. Are there any questions immediately? Yes? Okay. Please just say your name and then your question.
Of course. Hi, my name is Stephanie, and I find myself in an interesting position because I'm so admiring of your talk and agree with everything you said, and it was so beautifully and eloquently presented. But in terms of action, I heard we form committees and we protest, which is leaving me feeling very frustrated. Like, I'm a Quaker. I know from committees, okay? I've had enough committees. I know of wonderful groups that are actually doing things. What is WILPF doing? What is Disarm doing? What actions are proceeding from all of this wonderful thought and idealism?
Well, I think that's the continuing problem since 1915. And, 110 years later, next May, what will we really have to show for 110 years other than a lot of protesting a lot of signature gathering.
And a really cool train ride.
Yes, yes. Sorry, I missed that.
Oh, you're the one who told us about the train ride.
Yeah. But I'm sorry, I missed being on it. So I think that's an excellent question. And I think that's what we all have to start dedicating our lives to, is not just talk, but action, action, action. And that's going to be the challenge.
I agree. My name is Judith Han, and I'm also very action oriented. And I've been studying about war from a perspective of biology and anthropology. I'm academic, basically, in background for over 20 years. Big website about when we started making war, why we make war, all that stuff. And I concluded about 10 years ago that, first of all, we could end war. In other words, it's not genetically determined. It's not a genetic trait. It's a learned trait. It's a cultural trait. But I also found that there are some certain things, what they call necessary conditions, that would have to happen if we were to do that. And I concluded, there are quite a few of them, actually. But the key one that spoke to me was that you would have to empower women. And I discovered that. I wrote about that about 10 years ago. And at that time, I kind of decided, well, I don't have much else to say, because at that time, there were not enough powerful and influential women in the world to do much of anything about this. But about the middle of last year, it became obvious to me from something that no point in spending time talking about, that there now are things have changed since 20 years ago in lots of ways that make it possible that we could end war. And we can get into action. And that's when I wanted to look around and find out, okay, what group in the world could do this action? Because there are plenty of women now, and then there's plenty of reason. I can give you 10 other reasons why the world is primed, wanting to end war. People are hungry to end war, but how do we do it? And I thought, well, the organization that can do this, of course, would be WILPF. So that's when I rejoined WILPF. I joined WILPF many, many years ago when I was first interested in peace and war. But I had dropped out. But I came back, and it is the organization. They're national, they're international. They have branches all over the place. They have over 100 years of experience. And I joined the Disarm Committee. And that what I'm trying to convince them to do now is a program. I'm going to give you a card that will explain what we are all working on. Peggy, myself, and a few other friends have come up with something called Project Enduring Peace. And the goal of it is to get another international global peace treaty. And this requires action. We have to start lobbying, educating people. We've got a plan of action of what we're going to do between now and between next March. Yeah, example of cards. I'll give one to everybody. And we're on Instagram. You can go to our website. And the reason that I'm excited about the idea of WILPF getting activated here again is this could be something WILPF members could do. They could help out with all the action things that will be required for Project Enduring Peace. So WILPF here in San Diego has a place to go, and it has something that they can do that is action-oriented and directed toward directly attacking the peace industry. I mean, the war industry.
Thank you very much. I've just started a sheet where you can put your name, phone number, and email address if you're interested in helping to reestablish a local WILPF chapter in San Diego. Any further questions at this moment? Do I see a hand? Yes. Name?
My name is Bill Rowe. I'm a longtime social and peace activist in San Diego. I hear a lot about this overall umbrella of peace, talking about international issues. I'm more concerned about women not having peace in their home. I recently was informed that a lot of the safe houses for women who have been abused by their husbands to escape their home situation, the shelters that used to be around are no longer around anymore. I think peace begins at home.
Oh, yes.
And if you're concerned about women's issues, that the most important issue, I think, at least here in San Diego, and I don't know what's happening around the country, but women are the victims of war in their homes, not just by terrorist groups, but terrorist spouses. And we need to be concerned about women here at home and here in San Diego and around the world to have safe places where they can go to get relief from the war against them.
Amen.
Any other questions coming up right now?
I
Ken?
think the number is 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 women has experienced abuse. That's not good.
My name is Ken Ashbacher. Some numbers that you mentioned, and I think was mentioned a couple times about dollars and the financial effect of war. My feeling is that we are spending so much on the military industry, and our economy is so much based on making weapons and making the things that continually call for wars and being involved in wars. How do we get around that? How do we stop that? The big industries depend on making these things that the country is going to buy and then resell to other countries, where we provide weapons for the whole world.
Yes.
And how do we change that? How do we convince the people in power that we got to turn into some other kind of basis for our economy?
Good question. I remember hearing the CEO of Raytheon speaking, and he said, well, of course, we get all of our money. It's part of the war industry. But you know what? That's where the money is. And he said, if, I would leave Raytheon immediately if I could get another job that was not involved in the war industry. But he said, that's where the money is. How do we change that in our world? I mean, we're spending just about $1 trillion on our Department of Defense. And that doesn't even include the Department of Energy, where a lot of the nuclear funding goes.
Can I say something about that?
Please.
As circumstances give us the opportunity to do something about this, we need to take advantage of them. And what I'm noticing now, all noticing now really, is that the slaughter, I'm not even going to call it a war, the slaughter happening in Gaza, and not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, is is proving to be so upsetting to so many people now that President Biden has been forced to address that concern. He has not done it straightforwardly, but he's doing his best to appear to be addressing it. For example, he claimed just last week that Israel had a proposal for a ceasefire. Well, it turns out that Israel has been denying that it supports what he's been saying from the beginning, but he's still been setting that forward because he knows that his election is hanging in the balance right now. There are so many people who are against this war that it's, at least in the minds of many, becoming issue number one. He's made himself into a warmonger, a war criminal, and unfortunately, he's made us all into warmongers and war criminals too, insofar as we're part of the country he heads, and we support what our country does with our tax dollars. So this is actually our opportunity to take the kind of action that we're looking for, to seize the moment when it comes to us. And I believe that it's especially the action of the students on the campuses who have forced the president to take at least an action that appears to address the problem. He's afraid of losing votes. So what can that needs to take the form of supporting the students, of calling out the universities that are trying to squelch the students. We should all be crying out against that and not allowing that to hold sway in our country. And right here in San Diego, is anybody aware that on Monday it became clear that our, what do you call our local city attorney, refused to prosecute the students arrested at UCSD, which was a huge victory for us. And that needs to be happening all over the country. And I know that I went and was part of demonstrations at UCSD. We can all do that. And we can, the usual things as well. But the main thing is to take advantage of the situation when the opportunity is there.
Thank you.
But is there any further discussion on this one or another one?
My name's Nick. First, I want to make sort of a comment on the environmental impact of wars, something that's not been mentioned. Just one example, about 20% of the Ukraine agricultural land is going to be unusable for generations because of all the explosives happening. And I suspect the same will hold true for Gaza, considering all the explosions having gone on and the waste that creates. I don't think there's going to be much opportunities for agriculture there for the whole Gaza Strip for generations. The other point is, when I'm hearing what you're proposing, it's very laudable, but hasn't WILPF been doing this for 110 years or years things? And I'm kind of not seeing many results. I mean, I don't have any answers, but one definition of insanity is to keep on doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome. So if we want to achieve results, we're going to have to do something different than what we've been doing.
Good point. And I think it corresponds with the woman who brought it up originally. Yes. How do we really engage in effective actions?
Please say her name again, Anne, so we remember the association. The woman who brought it up originally. Oh, you mean from us here?
Yes.
Yes. Stephanie. Okay. Right. Someone, follow-up question. Yes.
Well, this is just silliness, but I've been feeling so frustrated, and I just in my mind invented landmines that after a year or so turn into fertilizer. That's the best I could do tonight. But I did find out a long time ago that there was a landmine manufacturer in La Mesa. And I at the time lived in La Mesa, and I was really upset by this. And I was so naive, I actually started calling like the mayor's office to find out where it was so I could go protest. I think I'm still on the CIA watch list for that.
You know, passing the microphone on has given me a chance to remember something else I wanted to say, and that is about the local student action here. It's been very well supported by mostly young people in town. And the ones that come first to mind are Palestinian young folks who are very, very active these days, and whom I'll just say whom I think deserve our support. And it's not only the Palestinian young folks I want to draw our attention to. I want to draw our attention to, at least in terms of Israel-Palestine, their counterparts, Jewish counterparts, because in this country, and now all over the whole world, there is an organization of mostly young, but not only young Jewish folks who have realized that the stories about the creation of Israel and the conduct of Israel that they've been taught as kids have turned out to be lies by which they feel very, very seriously misled, and they're reacting against it. And the name of the organization, of course, is called Jewish Voice, singular, Jewish Voice for Peace. And so the folks of Jewish Voice for Peace and the Palestinian folks are really worth our support here. And we at the PRC are doing what we can to support them by providing each number of those groups with a meeting place here down at the Friends Center. And we provided this space because it was Jewish Voice for Peace that organized our last, or with whom Peace Resource Center organized our last Friday night, third Friday night of the month, peace venue, right here. That professor I was telling you about, it came to talk about his book called, what was it? Jewish,
Has Zionism in the name.
yeah, it's Jewish. It's reforming Judaism apart from Zionism, or a new vision of Zionism. Revisioning Judaism apart from Zionism. That's the sense of it, not exactly the right words. So that group brought him here, and 1 month from now, the third Friday of next month, there will be another gathering just like this, also organized with Jewish Voice for Peace. And who are they bringing to the next one? Another wonderful professor from SDSU, Fareed Abdel Noor by name, whom I know personally, as well as I knew the other one. And he's going to be talking about why we devalue Palestinians, because that's what at the heart of all this. We cannot harm other people to the extent that the Israelis are harming the Palestinians. Now let's raise our own hands to the extent that we harm people from Africa. Go back even farther to the extent that we harmed our own native population here in this country. We cannot harm other people to the extent that we have done it in all three of those cases without actually devaluing them as people, as regarding them as subhuman. That's the only way we human beings can manage to do this. And so the talk next month is going to be about that core issue behind all injustice of one people towards another. Yes, Jay.
I wanted to bring something up because this is something that really concerns me. And I hope I can say this without really offending anybody. But I agree with you 100% what you said about President Biden. I wish that he would stand up more to Israel and not send over there the things that are doing. But the thing that concerns me is a lot of people in protesting are trying to go out of their way to hurt him or not support him. And what scares the living daylights out of me is if the other individual gets in that office instead of him. And I'm not trying to take sides or anything, but that's reality right there. And so we have to be able to criticize. We have to be able to take a stand, but we want to make sure that we don't hurt our best outcome that is good for this world.
Yes.
Thank you for that, Jay. I hear agreement all around. I'll pass it to you in just a second. I just want to respond to it. And in that very light, I want you to know that today when I opened my email, I saw a comment from one of our oldest and best known reporters who was the guy who unearthed what was happening at the My Lai massacre, Seymour Hersh. And he had a great column on it today. And he mentioned that not only are people in this country taking exception to President Biden and concerned that he might lose the election, but he also mentioned that some of the richest people in this country have a similar concern. And there is talk going around right now to possibly offer the nomination to Biden on condition that he decline it and be replaced by another person. And there were two persons mentioned as possible others to run in his place. If it really looks like he's going to have a tough time beating Trump, as it looks right now, he will. And those two people were our own Governor Gavin Newsom and a guy that I'd not even known was in contention here. And that's apparently a very popular Governor Pritzker in Illinois. And I know nothing about Pritzker, but I just want people to know that despite my condemnation of Biden's action over Israel does not mean a full condemnation of the guy himself. It's a very, very hard balance to take here. I fully acknowledge it. But how can we not criticize genocide in our name? It's really hard to decide how far to go with this. But in my opinion, it has to be said. Someone here wanted to say something.
Hi, I'm Peggy Lang. I'm here because of my complete admiration of Anne and what she has done over the years, and because of my friend Judith, who is starting this PEP organization. I just want to say, though, it's peace. It's peace that's the important thing, because everything else is polarized. You have all these issues, and you're never going to get a consensus on all of these issues. But everybody here craves, from the bottom of our heart, we crave peace. And so all of our efforts, to me, should be all of our energies and strategies and all that we can think of to do should be aimed at the unifying concept of peace. Everybody can raise their hand and say, give us peace. We demand it. We must have peace. We can't do anything without peace. Everything else is sabotage. it sabotages peace. And nobody disagrees with that. I mean, pretty much. I suppose if you're in the war industry, you might take issue with that and say, no, war's good. But basically, the whole world, Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives, we can get behind that. And so I'm going to be, Judith has a wonderful treaty thing that she's done a lot of research on what she calls peace systems and peace treaties and whatnot. And her approach is based on a very incremental, logical procedure of how to get the world to agree on a peace treaty. It's something I've never seen before. And I mean, but it's very, abstract, kind of intellectual. And I'm not sure that we can rally big crowds around that. I would like to think we could, but what I feel sure that we could rally big crowds around is peace. Just that. And once we have that momentum, like the peace movements of the 60s, once we have that going again, then we can have our committees. I'm not saying stop working on your committees and your issues and that. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying, let's get behind peace. Think of peace music. I was just in a concert. This is my last thing I'm going to say, where the final song was "Let There Be Peace," and it was kind of a spiritual kind of thing at the end. Let sweet peace begin with me. We can interject energy into this movement. There are ways to do this. Our music, what we wear, T-shirts. I mean, everybody can make a step in the right direction. Just little things. Just get peace going again. That's what
Couldn't agree more.
Could I get you to say one more thing? If you're the person who passed out these cards, could you just say, oh, you're the person who passed out the cards. Could you say something about this card that you passed out just to let people know and to let our audience who will be listening to the recording of this at some time? Oh, no, sorry.
Yeah, this is great. This gives me the opportunity to explain what this is about. The idea of a peace system, if I were to ask you, do you know what a peace system is? You may or may not say, yeah, I know what that is. But my guess is that you don't know. And that's what this anthropologist has explained, is that there are people and societies across the world and into past history, with groups of people who lived with each other, beside each other, and they decided, they had visionary leaders who said, don't you think that making war is really stupid? How about if we decided we don't want to make war with each other anymore? And these people decided that they would do that. And he describes how they did it and what it looks like, the traits that they share. Some of you may know about the Iroquois Confederation, because a lot of peace people do know about the Iroquois. But he then looked at a tribe of 10 tribes in Brazil. These are indigenous people, but they've been making war forever. And they decided they have to have a visionary leader or leaders that come up with the idea, don't you think we should stop doing this? And then the other system, believe it or not, is the European Union. After World War II, which was so grim, all of the countries of Europe, we're talking the Western Europe, okay, Western Europe, they said, we don't want to do this anymore. This is crazy. We need to agree among ourselves that we are not going to make war with each other. And then they sat down and they made a peace treaty. It's called the Treaty of Maastricht. They drew up a treaty that would codify how the Europeans would all live together without making war on each other. I won't go into more detail than that, but that's what I'm going to be teaching people about. What are peace systems? What do they look like? What traits do they have? And by the way, the United States of America was formed as a peace system. There were 13 states. There were people who came from Europe and they knew all about wars and all about war, we're making war forever. And they said, look, new land, new start. Let's set it up so that we don't make wars with each other. We live by the rule of law in peace. And they just said, yeah, let's do that. These enlightened people said, let's do that. And they sat down and you know what they did? They made a constitution. The Constitution is our statement of our peace system. It was only 13 states to begin with, and it enlarged and enlarged. We came very close to losing it at the Civil War. The Civil War was our first big test. You know what Abraham Lincoln said, you know, we are gathered together here to see if any nation so conceived can long endure. We're fighting a great civil war to see if it can long endure. And we made it through that one. But a lot of people are saying we are on the cusp of losing it again because the world is in such turmoil, so much unhappiness, so many wars, so many bad things that we could talk about, and committees that you could be on to stop this and stop that and stop the other. But the key would be you need money to do all those things. And where does our money go? The war machine. The war industry is our enemy. And part of the reason that it survives is because most people do not believe you can end war. If you do not believe you can do it, you can't do it. So our cause is to explain to people there are peace systems. There are people who have made these systems. There are communities called, for example, Quakers, who live in the midst of warring communities, but they have figured out how to live without war. It's not genetic. So that it's an educational system, first of all, about peace systems and that we can do it because people have to believe. You have to convince people that you can actually end war. You can spend your money and your time because this can happen. This is the vision. This is how it'll look. And then we have to lobby like crazy. We have to start doing, that's what the women of WILPF will be powerfully able to do because there are millions of them around the world. All these WILPF branches, we should be a WILPF branch. I hope to recruit all of the WILPF branches, not only in this country, but there are many, many branches around the world, all of them going for people power. Get the people of the world to demand of their leaders, no more war. You come now to the peace table and you make a treaty and you sign the darn thing. So that's what this is all about. That's the vision. I would love to come and talk here in detail about what those traits are of those kind of societies.
I think you've just lined yourself up for a future Friday night peace third Friday night peace venue here. That's wonderful. We're getting close to the time at which we need to put the room back in order. Are there any other burning questions at the moment? I have two, but I want to put anybody else first. If anyone, okay. While we're talking about my two, if anything else comes up, we'll squeeze them in. Okay. I want to know more about that Resolution 1325. Who was it that actually formed that resolution, and for whom is that resolution, and how can we integrate it into our lives?
Good question. I like to say that our Secretary of State, Hillary Rodham Clinton, had a hand in that. But I'm not sure. But I also remember that here in San Diego, we were asked, one of my organizations, to participate in a town hall meeting to discuss what should be included in that 1325. And so there were a lot of organizations that were involved. And we, being on the border here, we were concerned that there might not be enough emphasis on what's going on in border communities. So we participated as far as that was concerned. So it was opened to women throughout our country, and we here in San Diego had an opportunity to participate.
And this was done by the United Nations, is that right?
No, it wasn't done by the United Nations. Well, it was done by the United Nations. It was resolved and discussed and what have you in the Security Council. It's a UN Security Council resolution.
Okay. And I think it would be lovely if you could just get me a link to that resolution, and we should publish it on our Peace Resource Center website so that it can be available for people, because I didn't know about it, and it seemed like a big deal that we should all be aware of.
Well, unfortunately, at very few peace agreement sessions, women aren't involved, and that's the purpose. 1325. Women must be at the table.
Well,
and so that's become another issue. And there are now 8 more resolutions that piled on to that first one.
Well, then let's have some comment about those follow-up resolutions too on our website, okay, so that we can make it much more well known. So we're going to put it on our table. Any other questions come up for anybody? Okay, my second question is what was the conference just end of May, beginning of June? What did we call that? The WILPF, what?
It was water in the forefront of peace.
Yes. The first thing I thought of when I heard that was how Native Americans proclaim that water is life. And I wonder whether there was the involvement of Native American women in that conference. Do you happen to know?
I'm sure there were. Yeah.
Okay. And tell us your name again, please. Judith Hand. Well, I just want to point out how that dovetails with what Judith said earlier about the Iroquois being part of the creation of the United States as a nook in the world in which everybody living together, at least here, would treat each other peacefully. And so the Native Americans were behind that. We had that powerful example. We humans need good examples. And that's a similar example that occurs to me is important for us in dealing with water. Water is life. Okay, one more chance. Any more questions? It's just about cleanup time. Let's leave it to Anne to take us out with a last word.
Well, I was grateful to Judith to mention what had happened after our country became one that created a constitution. But there's one thing that really annoyed me. Of those 13 states, all 13 of them put in their own constitutions that women would not have the right to vote. Each one of those 13 countries included that in colonies, included in their constitutions that women were not allowed to vote. Anyway, thank you all for being here tonight. It's just been a pleasure. And I think Edward might want to say a word. And I want to thank Edward for all his help.
Somebody on Zoom would like a question read out.
Oh.
I apologize, but this is from Marie Johnson, who would like to say, please read and tell Anne I thought her lecture was excellent. I always learn from her. Anne would like to say that I believe we need to be aware of euphemisms and use words that describe what is actually happening to help awaken one another. Department of Defense, for instance, in my time, it was called the Department of War. Food insecurity, children and families going hungry, conflicts, war with people dying. Words have the power, and we need to reframe describing situations to turn around conversations. I hope I did her justice, but that is what she wrote in the chat.
Thank you, Marie.
Yes. Ever since the writing of 1984, newspeak has been creeping into our language. Well, it predated that. He was recognizing what was already happening. And this occurs to me as a term with which we can actually notice this trend, become more aware of it, and become more conscious of how we need to oppose it. And one more word from you. It can't end with me.
Okay, well, thank you all again for being here. It's just been delightful, and I thoroughly enjoyed myself. Who'd have thought?